At the reception, a woman warmly welcomed Daniel Collins, praising him and expressing excitement about his role at the Community Trust following Michael Reeves's departure. Daniel responded graciously, acknowledging the challenge ahead. Thomas Wells, the bank president and head of the search committee who had recommended Collins, beamed with pride and guided him around the room. The reception was attended by local business leaders, city officials, and representatives from charitable agencies supported by the Community Trust. The atmosphere was friendly, enhanced by complimentary drinks and high-quality hors d'oeuvres. Noticing a tall man chatting with the mayor, Daniel inquired about him and the attractive woman with him. Wells identified them as Reverend Samuel Turner of Grace Episcopal Church and Emily Martinez, director of the New Beginnings Women's Shelter, and Reverend Turner's wife. Daniel was surprised that a minister had a wife, but Wells explained that Emily had kept her maiden name after marriage. When Daniel asked about the importance of meeting Reverend Turner, Wells described him as one of the most influential and respected people in the town, known for his integrity and trusted for advice beyond his parish. Intrigued, Daniel agreed to meet them. Wells led Daniel to introduce him to the couple. After the introductions, Reverend Turner asked Daniel if his experience at Unilever had been useful in his new role at the Community Trust. Daniel replied that while the private sector often focuses on short-term gains, its emphasis on measurable results has been valuable in the nonprofit sector, and he considers himself results-oriented. He then addressed Emily Martinez, complimenting her on being an energetic and successful agency head, and proposed she lead one of his interagency task forces. Flattered, Emily accepted the offer. Later, at the parsonage, Reverend Turner teased Emily about her blush from the compliment. Emily joked that her husband could learn to give compliments more often, to which Reverend Turner playfully replied that while he may not be the most charming, he was teachable. They ended up playfully chasing each other to the bedroom. A few months later, Reverend Turner met with Michael Reeves for lunch to catch up. Michael, now retired, expressed his regret about not meeting with people as often and feeling less valued. Reverend Turner reassured him that his old team still respected him and would seek his advice, though Michael suspected the new leadership might prefer to distance itself from the past. After one of his team members called with a question, Reverend Turner learned that Collins had reprimanded her, insisting she check with him before contacting anyone else. Reverend Turner thought this was unhelpful, but Michael dismissed it, saying the new executive had his own agenda and that consulting him might hinder the transition. Reverend Turner assured Michael that he wasn't an old-timer and acknowledged his extensive knowledge about the Community Trust. They finished their lunch and decided to stay in touch. Reflecting on Michael's comments, Reverend Turner resolved to speak with Thomas Wells to get his view on Collins's performance. Wells's secretary, a member of Reverend Turner's congregation, promptly connected him to Thomas. Thomas reported that Collins was performing exceptionally well, securing donor commitments even before the campaign started. Reverend Turner felt reassured, realizing his initial concerns were likely unfounded. A week later, Reverend Turner visited the Community Trust office for a meeting with an account executive. He greeted Linda Cooper, a longtime bookkeeper, with a friendly wave despite never having been formally introduced. He then discussed an upcoming audit on homelessness with Mark Davis, an area of special interest for him, given Grace Church's ongoing efforts to support the homeless through clothing drives and a soup kitchen. After their discussion, Mark asked Reverend Turner to join him for coffee in the break room. Noting the unusual tone, Reverend Turner agreed. Once inside, Mark poured coffee for both of them, and after ensuring the room was clear, voiced his concerns. Mark revealed that he was considering leaving the Community Trust due to dissatisfaction with the new boss, Collins. According to Mark, Collins was a micromanager who created a tense environment, with staff constantly fearful of his reprimands. Mark described Collins as a petty tyrant with a short man syndrome and mentioned that several colleagues were also contemplating resigning. Reverend Turner was alarmed by this news, and Mark's comparison of Collins to a chihuahua only heightened his concern. As Mark glanced at his watch, he said he had to return to work, and Reverend Turner offered to walk with him, urging him not to make any hasty decisions. Leaving the break room, Reverend Turner was startled to encounter Collins, who greeted him with insincere cheerfulness. Collins abruptly invited Reverend Turner to his office for the latest homeless data, dismissing any further conversation. Reverend Turner reluctantly followed Collins to his office, where Collins handed him a file and addressed him coolly, suggesting that if Reverend Turner had concerns, he should discuss them directly. Reverend Turner, feeling uncomfortable, assured Collins he hadn't been checking up on him, but was simply interested in how the organization was faring under the new leadership. Collins insisted that the organization was doing well and advised Reverend Turner to come to him directly for any future information. Reverend Turner left the office puzzled by Collins's prickly demeanor. When Emily arrived home, Reverend Turner, still unsettled by the encounter, asked her opinion on Collins. Emily, who had worked with Collins's task force, described him as a breath of fresh air compared to the previous, less effective regime. Although she acknowledged that Collins was demanding and had stepped on some toes, she appreciated his effectiveness and decisiveness. Reverend Turner noted that Thomas Wells praised Collins for his proactive approach with donors, to which Emily agreed, confirming that Collins's methods were indeed productive. They ended the conversation with a light-hearted remark about dinner and went to prepare the meal. That night, Reverend Turner was haunted by the same nightmare that had troubled him for a decade. He and his spotter, Alex Rivera, were on overwatch duty in Mosul. Their sniper team had become highly effective over the past 18 months, known for their exceptional teamwork. They were tasked with tracking down an enemy who had been causing significant casualties. Command decided to deploy their own team to combat this threat. Turner lay prone behind a rooftop chimney, his M24 rifle hidden in the shadows, while Alex was stationed a block away, scanning for the enemy. With their throat microphones and earbuds for communication, on the second day of their watch, Turner faced a difficult task. The city's irregular streets distorted sound, and they had been unable to spot the enemy amid the afternoon heat. Alex reported seeing a young girl, no more than 10 years old, unable to move. Alex's voice grew urgent as he described the girl's worsening condition and the lack of help from bystanders. Determined to save her, Alex announced he was going down to assist her despite Turner's pleas for him to wait for backup. As Alex moved to help, Turner searched the area for any threats, only to see Alex rushing to the girl's side. Just as Alex scooped her up, a second shot rang out. That night, Reverend Turner was tormented by a recurring nightmare. He and his spotter, Alex Rivera, were on overwatch duty in Mosul. Turner, lying behind a rooftop chimney, saw through his scope as Alex was shot in the thigh, blood spurting from the wound. Alex fell, trying to shield a young girl he had just rescued. Alex's agonized voice came through the earbuds, reporting that the bullet had hit bone and that he was trapped. Despite Turner's determination to rescue him, Alex warned him it was a trap designed to lure Turner out and kill him too. He urged Turner to stay put and not fall into the sniper trap. Desperate and conflicted, Turner reluctantly agreed to follow Alex's advice. Alex, now calm despite his dire situation, asked Turner to pray with him. Though Turner was not religious, he followed Alex's instructions to recite a prayer. As Turner reached the line, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil," a third shot silenced Alex. Overwhelmed by grief and guilt, Turner searched the area in vain for the enemy, cursing and crying as a fourth shot claimed the girl's life. Awakened by the nightmare, Turner sat up in bed, drenched in sweat and pale. Each repetition of the dream left him questioning his actions and feeling a deep sense of failure. He quietly left the room to sit in the living room until his trembling subsided, trying to find solace before returning to sleep. When Emily woke up, she found the bed empty and discovered Turner sleeping on the couch. Though his nightmares were common, she hated that he was still tormented by his war experiences. She gently covered him with a blanket and prepared for her day, selecting a silk suit from the closet. Emily chose an outfit she had altered from a designer label she'd found at a thrift store. With a full day ahead at a community trust task force meeting, she wanted to appear both professional and smart. Before leaving, she left Turner a note about her schedule and the possibility of running late. The task force meeting was held at a high-end hotel, a venue Daniel Collins preferred for its neutrality and quality service. Initially skeptical of the extravagance, Emily appreciated the professional setting and the effective way Collins managed the meeting. She admired his skill in steering the discussion and organizing tasks efficiently. As the meeting concluded, Collins thanked each participant in the lobby. When he reached Emily, he asked her to stay behind. He handed her a key to a breakout room and directed her to wait there while he finished with the others. Surprised, Emily headed to room 514, where she found a table with papers and a laptop. She chose to wait on the love seat, her curiosity piqued by the unexpected request and Collins's strong presence. After what felt like an eternity, Emily heard the door unlock and saw Collins enter. He nodded at her, and without a word, removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie before sitting on the edge of the bed. Emily began to sit on the love seat, but Collins instructed her to remain standing. Surprised, she complied. He then remarked on her impressive presence, noting that she'd been the most intelligent and natural leader in the group. As she blushed at the praise, Collins told her to hold her response. He walked around her, inspecting her as he spoke. Returning to his seat, he commented on her leadership skills and how her staff likely depended heavily on her for decisions, even minor ones. Emily thought about how true that was, realizing how much she was leaned on. Collins then revealed that he understood the burden of such responsibility and acknowledged her hidden desire for someone else to take over, to make decisions for her. His insight shocked her, as he had tapped into her unspoken wish to be relieved of constant responsibility and to follow someone else's lead for a change. As Emily listened to Collins, she felt entranced by his words, which tapped into desires she had long repressed. Her need to submit grew stronger, overwhelming her reservations. Collins then directed her to remove her jacket, blouse, and skirt, which she did under his stern gaze. Standing in only her underwear and pantyhose, she felt a mix of humiliation and arousal. Collins's harsh treatment intensified her feelings as he tore her pantyhose. He then began to act with her aggressively, with no tenderness or affection. The experience was raw and dominating, heightening her arousal despite the pain. Collins's actions escalated as he spanked her and touched her, causing both pain and unexpected pleasure. Afterward, he briefly rested on her before dressing and leaving Emily exhausted and immobilized. When Collins returned, he was impeccably dressed and showed no sign of what had transpired. He informed her that the room was paid for and left with his laptop and papers, closing the door behind him. Emily slowly got up and went to the bathroom. The woman in the mirror was unrecognizable. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled, and her panties were visible through her torn pantyhose. As she tried to fix her appearance, she couldn't stop questioning herself about what had just happened. When she managed to restore some semblance of normalcy, she gathered her things and checked the hallway. Seeing it was clear, she quickly left and took the elevator, where a maid gave her a peculiar look. Emily wondered if she had overheard anything. Driving home, Emily was lost in a daze, tormented by images of the hotel encounter. She felt deep guilt and self-loathing, particularly over her infidelity with Daniel Collins and the realization of how much she had enjoyed it. As she arrived home, the thought of facing Reverend Turner filled her with dread. She felt certain he would know what she had done. Panicking, she wiped her tears away before entering the house. Finding Turner had prepared dinner, she was overwhelmed and decided to lie about her health, claiming she was feeling unwell and needed to skip dinner to rest. Turner was worried about Emily, but she reassured him and insisted he enjoy his dinner. Once he returned to the table, she retreated to the bedroom, undressed, and got into bed. When Turner checked on her later, she feigned sleep, though guilt kept her awake for hours. The next morning, Turner decided to let her rest, thinking it would be beneficial if she stayed home. He was surprised when Emily called before noon, saying she felt better and was going to work. Turner was pleased by her dedication. 2 days later, while Turner was working on his sermon, Mrs. Baker informed him that Daniel Collins was there to see him. Turner welcomed Collins, who revealed he wasn't there for community trust matters but for a personal issue. Collins inquired about the Episcopal Church's stance on confession, catching Turner off guard. Turner explained that while the church includes general confession in its services, private confession is rare and lacks the formal confessional structure found in Roman Catholicism. Collins asked if confessions were strictly confidential. Turner confirmed that the seal of confession meant that priests must keep confessions completely confidential, even after the confessor's death. Turner studied Collins carefully, suspecting that he was there to make a confession. Collins confirmed his intent and asked about the process, noting the absence of a confession box at Grace Church. Turner explained that he preferred to keep confessions informal and private, typically holding them in his office to avoid disturbances. Collins expressed his desire to confess adultery, revealing that he had engaged with a married woman. When Turner asked if he wished to name her, Collins declined, indicating that Turner knew her. Although saddened by the involvement of someone he knew, Turner focused on Collins's apparent lack of remorse, which irritated him. Collins's casual attitude towards his actions prompted Turner to question his penitence. Turner advised Collins to spend time reflecting on the gravity of his actions and their consequences rather than performing traditional prayers. He suggested reading the General Confession of Sin from the Book of Common Prayer and revisiting the 10 Commandments, particularly the 7th. Collins took the book from Reverend Turner, expressed relief, and left. Turner, returning to his desk, was puzzled by Collins's visit. He had never seen Collins at Grace Church or any other church, and the request for confession was unexpected. Turner was concerned about the implications of Collins's adultery, particularly its potential impact on his professional and personal circles, including the community trust. He regretted that people often acted on impulse rather than reason. Meanwhile, Emily struggled with persistent distractions at work. Disturbed sleep and troubling dreams, she felt a growing distance from Turner, which alarmed her, given his supportive nature. Turner, reflecting on Collins's casual attitude towards his confession, questioned the sincerity of his penitence. Frustrated and burdened by his role, Turner wished he could discuss his concerns with someone, but knew he had to keep them confidential. After a long day, Emily nervously called Daniel Collins. When he answered, his smooth voice made her uneasy. Despite her fear, she asked to see him again, emphasizing her need. His laugh made her shudder. On weekends, Reverend Turner was always busy with last-minute preparations for Sunday services, so when Emily said she needed to work on Saturday afternoon, he was relieved as it meant he wouldn't have to attend to her. When Emily returned home that evening, Turner was alarmed by her appearance. She looked exhausted and was visibly in pain. She brushed off his concerns, attributing it to an early period, and went to bed early without eating. Turner decided to insist on a doctor's visit. On Sunday, Emily skipped church, worsening Turner's worry. After services, he hurried home with her favorite fast food, relieved to find her feeling better. She attributed her discomfort to a short-term virus and dismissed the idea of seeing a doctor. Turner was reassured enough about Emily's condition to attend the vestry meeting that evening, though he remained deeply worried. As he drove to the church, he recalled meeting Emily during a difficult time in his life. After his military service and struggling with nightmares, he met her at Student Health, where she had offered comfort and support. Their connection had grown, leading to their marriage in the Divinity School chapel, and she had been his steadfast support ever since. On Monday, as Turner was finishing up at his desk, Mrs. Baker informed him that Daniel Collins had returned. Though preoccupied with Emily, Turner asked her to bring Collins in. When Collins arrived, he confessed to committing adultery with the same woman again, showing no real remorse. Turner was disappointed and questioned Collins's sincerity, emphasizing the need for genuine contrition and consideration for the woman and her family. Collins brushed off Turner's concerns, claiming that discussing his actions had made him feel better. Turner, troubled by Collins's visit, paced his office in frustration. He wondered if Collins was mocking the church, testing him, or genuinely conflicted. Regardless, Turner felt he should focus on helping his congregation rather than dealing with Collins's games. He was particularly concerned about the impact on the community trust, and debated whether to alert someone on the board about Collins without breaching confidentiality. Meanwhile, Emily struggled with guilt over her infidelity, Her attraction to Collins and the ecstasy she experienced with him created a powerful internal conflict. Despite hating herself for cheating on Turner, she was torn by her desire for Collins. Desperate to resist, she was still stunned when Collins called, giving her a curt command to meet him at the Royal Sands Hotel that weekend. When Turner got home that evening, Emily sensed he was preoccupied, but he brushed off her concerns, attributing it to a minor issue with a parishioner. She chose not to press further and instead mentioned plans to visit her sister for the weekend. Turner agreed, asking her to give Sarah his best. Later, Turner struggled to sleep, worrying about his encounter with Daniel Collins. He resolved to visit the community trust the next morning to investigate further, which helped him finally relax. Emily also had trouble sleeping, fixated on Collins and her compulsion to submit to him. She tried to rationalize her behavior as just a fling and convinced herself it was a temporary indulgence. Yet she felt guilty and hypocritical, aware of the excuses she often heard at the women's shelter. She also blamed the pressure of Turner's role and his overly considerate nature for her dissatisfaction, though she knew these traits were part of why she married him. What hurt Emily the most was knowing how much Turner needed her. When she first met him, he was a veteran struggling with his past. Her most vivid memory was the night he broke down, recounting his best friend's death. Though shocked by his past, she was moved by his decision to attend divinity school and admired his resilience. Over time, she helped him rise from his struggles to become a respected community figure, though she knew he remained fragile. Her infidelity felt like a betrayal, risking not only her vows but Turner's well-being. The next morning, Emily's pillowcase was damp from her tears. At Grace Church, Reverend Turner scheduled a meeting with Mark Davis at the Community Trust, hoping to understand Daniel Collins' odd behavior. On his way, he encountered Collins, who asked him to visit his office after the meeting. Reverend Turner reluctantly agreed to visit Daniel Collins after his meeting with Mark Davis, though he preferred not to be seen by Collins. After a brief discussion about homelessness, he went to Collins's office. Inside, Collins sat behind a high desk, looking smug. Without wasting time, Collins confessed that he planned to commit adultery that weekend and wanted to confess in advance to avoid trouble later. Reverend Turner, infuriated by the mockery of the sacrament, told Collins he would pray for him but could no longer serve as his confessor. He left, troubled and frustrated, wondering if Collins might be mentally ill. On Saturday morning, Emily seemed eager for her weekend getaway. Turner took a break from his routine to see her off and noticed she was preoccupied, which he chalked up to her excitement about seeing her sister. He told her to drive carefully and said he'd miss her, but she was too hurried to fully engage. As she drove away, he called out, "I love you," but she didn't hear. Back inside, Turner felt uneasy, and a troubling thought crossed his mind. Collins mentioned taking his lover to the beach. He tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the idea gnawed at him, affecting his concentration on his Sunday sermon. He considered calling Emily, but was unsure how to ask without causing suspicion or conflict. Instead, he thought of calling Sarah, Emily's sister, to confirm Emily's visit. However, he worried that asking Sarah might reveal his doubts or make Sarah seem complicit if she was covering for Emily. In a panic, he finally decided to call Sarah using a pretext, hoping to ease his anxiety. Sarah answered the phone, relieved to hear from Turner, but her tone shifted when she realized he wasn't calling about Emily's well-being. Turner reassured her that Emily was fine and asked Sarah to visit as they hadn't seen her in a while. Sarah mentioned she was leaving for Boston in an hour and wouldn't return for a week, but hoped to visit next month. When she asked to speak with Emily, Turner froze, realizing Emily had lied about visiting her sister. The revelation struck Turner with the same anguish he felt during the war. He was overwhelmed by the betrayal and grief, realizing that Emily's strength and love, which had been his anchor, were now gone. His initial pain quickly turned to anger, especially towards Daniel Collins, whom he now believed had been using Emily to humiliate him. Turner's initial shock turned to intense suspicion about how Daniel Collins had entangled Emily. He wondered if Collins had seduced, drugged, or blackmailed her, or if Emily had initiated the affair herself. The thought made him violently ill. After vomiting, Turner's thoughts cleared. He realized that Emily had betrayed him repeatedly, based on Collins's confessions and recent suspicious behavior. Collins's motives went beyond mere lust. He seemed to be waging a personal war against Turner. Collins's confessions had put Turner in a tough spot. Although Turner suspected Emily's infidelity, he was hesitant to reveal Collins's admissions, fearing he would break his vow of confidentiality. He grappled with whether Collins's lack of genuine remorse justified breaking his oath, questioning if he had the right to determine the validity of the confession. Unable to resolve his dilemma, Turner decided to investigate on his own. With his limited budget, he searched online for beach resort hotels and, based on room rates, called the most expensive one. The Royal Sands confirmed that Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Collins were checked in, but Turner chose not to speak to them, realizing it was too late. Feeling defeated, Turner slumped in his chair and realized he had neglected to ask God for help. He prayed for guidance, but found his faith empty and his prayers meaningless. Feeling abandoned, he despaired, questioning his worth as a priest and feeling he had lost everything: his wife, marriage, and faith. In his sorrow, Turner recalled his time after Alex's death. He had withdrawn and obsessively studied the sniper's tactics that ended Alex. In the afternoon, Turner prepared for his ambush by bringing his M40 Magnum, a decoy stuffed with newspapers, and a spare uniform and helmet. He set up the decoy to draw the sniper out from the minaret's gallery and took his own position nearby. As the call to prayer played, Turner saw the barrel of the Magnum through his scope. He adjusted his aim and fired, causing an explosion of bricks. He continued to do it until he emptied 3 clips, ensuring the threat was neutralized. Although command was unhappy with his actions, Turner was honorably discharged due to PTSD and awarded the Expert Rifleman Medal. Re-energized by the memory, Turner retrieved his Barrett from storage, cleaned it, and placed it back in the bedroom. Despite feeling he wasn't a good husband or priest, he was confident in handling his enemies. On Sunday, parishioners at Grace Church noticed a marked shift in Reverend Turner's demeanor. His usually positive expression was replaced with a stern, foreboding look. During the general confession, he emphasized the solemnity of the words, "We have done those things that we ought not to have done, and we have left undone those things which we ought to have done, and there is no health in us." For his sermon, he focused on the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot's wife being turned into a pillar of salt, surprising many with the dark tone. After the service, while congregants typically engaged with Reverend Turner, most hurriedly left that day. Thomas Wells approached the priest, concerned. He asked if everything was okay, noting Turner's uncharacteristic demeanor and the absence of his wife, Emily. Reverend Turner assured him that Emily was visiting her sister for the weekend and would return the next day. Thomas offered his support, though he remained visibly concerned. After changing out of his robes, Reverend Turner was about to head home when he answered a call at the reception desk. Linda Cooper from the Community Trust was on the line, requesting a meeting that afternoon. Although he was reluctant to see anyone, Turner agreed to meet her at 3 p.m. He could sense from her voice that she was upset and felt a duty to assist her despite not knowing her well. Reverend Turner met Linda Cooper outside the church and escorted her to his office. Once seated, he asked how he could help. Linda, on the verge of tears, expressed concern about troubling developments at the Community Trust and handed him a stack of papers for review, mentioning she couldn't reach Michael Reeves, who was on vacation. Later, after visiting elderly parishioners at a retirement home, Reverend Turner returned to his office to examine the documents. A text from Emily read, "Having a great time with Sarah, staying over till Monday morning. See you then. Love you." Distraught, he fought the urge to smash his phone, left his office, and walked through the quiet streets near the Community Trust, taking notes before heading home. On Monday morning, Emily was running late from her beach trip, having slept poorly and feeling sore. She hoped the discomfort would keep her alert during the drive. When Emily arrived at the hotel on Saturday, Daniel instructed her to check in as Mrs. Collins. The clerk handed her a key to the penthouse suite, and Emily noted Daniel's taste for luxury, with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Upon entering the suite, Daniel immediately ordered her to undress. Emily saw a suitcase filled with bondage gear and felt a mix of fear and thrill. The night was a blur of intense and degrading activities. Daniel's stamina was impressive, likely aided by stimulants. At one point, a loud knock interrupted them. Daniel answered the door in boxers to find hotel management checking on Mrs. Collins. Emily, humiliated, had to present herself in a towel. She walked back to the bedroom, exposing her reddened rear to the manager, who left with a reminder to keep noise levels down. Later, Daniel ordered room service, and Emily had to hurriedly cover herself with sheets as the bellboy delivered their food. The same scene played out when the food was cleared away. After dinner, while watching a bondage film, Daniel, inspired by the movie, used a ball gag on Emily to avoid further interruptions. Despite her screams, the management didn't return. When Emily woke on Sunday, she panicked at the thought of being late for church, but then remembered where she was and felt guilty. She tried to brush it aside as Daniel announced they would spend the afternoon at the beach. He handed her a tiny white swimsuit with all modesty inserts removed. It clung to her body and would become transparent when wet. At the beach, Emily felt a mix of embarrassment as she drew stares from men and disapproving looks from women. Daniel enjoyed the attention, making her walk ahead to maximize the view. After returning to the suite, Daniel took her to a fancy dinner where Emily began to look forward to their return. However, once back in their room, Daniel swiftly removed her dress, placed a ball into her mouth, and bound her to the bed, face down. He then covered her with a sleep mask, leaving her helpless. After an intense session of arousal, Emily was startled by a knock on the door. Although she couldn't see or hear well due to the sleep mask, she felt the bonds on her ankles loosen, leaving her restrained by her wrists. She then sensed a larger presence behind her, with large hands gripping her hips. When the stranger finally collapsed on top of her, Emily passed out from the overwhelming sensations. Upon waking, she found herself on her side, with her wrists freed. She felt the heavy stranger reposition her to straddle him. As she reached down, she was astonished by the size of his body, which was so large her hands couldn't fully encircle it. As Daniel and the big man began to move together, the initial awkwardness gave way to a powerful rhythm. Emily felt overwhelmed, screaming in pleasure until all three collapsed in exhaustion. When she woke up, sunlight filled the room, and the big man was gone. Daniel, freshly showered and dressed, told her flatly, "Next time there will be 5 men." Emily shuddered at the thought. After Daniel left, Emily quickly packed her things, ran a comb through her hair, and headed for the lobby. Daniel had already settled the bill, so she just had to deal with the desk clerk's lingering stare, which she realized was due to her not wearing any underwear. Panicked, she drove to a department store and rushed to the women's wear section to buy a white bra and a 3-pack of panties. In the parking lot, she awkwardly changed into them while sitting in her car, drawing curious glances from a teenage boy nearby. As she drove, a wave of guilt washed over her. The past weekend felt like a bizarre dream. Had she really betrayed her husband with such debauchery? Tears welled up as she thought about Turner and the shame he would feel if he knew. She vowed to be a better wife and never see Daniel again, but the memory of Daniel's promises made her shiver. Conflicted, she questioned why she desired such behavior despite loving her husband. She blamed Daniel for tempting her, but deep down she knew she was also at fault. She hadn't been forced. She had chosen to stay and partake in what he offered. As Emily drove through the outskirts of the city, she pushed her turbulent thoughts aside, focusing on the urgent tasks awaiting her at the office. Arriving at the women's shelter, she was quickly overwhelmed by paperwork and phone calls, losing track of time. During a brief lunch break at her desk, she realized she hadn't called Turner. She dialed the church office and reached Mrs. Baker, who informed her that Turner was at a meeting and might stay overnight at the hospital for a visitation. There was no other message. Emily felt frustrated and uneasy about the delay in reconnecting with Turner. The thought of him possibly avoiding her or being upset gnawed at her, though she dismissed the idea of him knowing about her weekend as too awful to consider. Returning home late, she found the parish house dark and Turner's car missing. With relief, she unpacked her suitcase, ran a load of laundry, and took a long shower to wash away the lingering discomfort from the hotel. While changing, she noticed a long black bag in the corner of the bedroom. Realizing it contained Turner's old rifle, which had been stored in the attic, she recoiled. The sight of it brought back troubling memories of Turner's dark days after returning from the Middle East and made her feel uneasy. Nervously, Emily tried calling Turner's cell phone but only reached his voicemail. Remembering he turned his phone off at the hospital, she felt uneasy and couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. The next morning, Reverend Turner found a note from Mrs. Baker about Emily's call and set it aside, deciding to address it later. Linda Cooper then arrived with additional papers which made him uneasy. He quickly called Thomas Wells to arrange a meeting and left his office with a grim expression. Daniel Collins, annoyed by a summons from Thomas Wells, complained about the inconvenience as he drove to the bank. Spotting Reverend Turner leaving the bank, he sneered, recalling their recent encounter. At the bank, Wells informed Daniel, "The trustees have unanimously decided to remove you as executive director of the community trust, effective immediately." Ignoring Daniel's offered handshake, Collins was outraged as he confronted Wells, demanding to know what was going on. Wells calmly presented a set of expense reports detailing numerous unauthorized personal purchases, inappropriate expenditures, and overspending beyond the community trust's limits. Collins hastily reviewed the papers, tearing them apart and dismissing the issue as trivial. He argued that his increased donations and higher revenues for the trust more than justified any overspending and claimed he was worth more than his salary. Wells, filled with anger and contempt, explained that Collins had no right to decide what was acceptable with donor money. The funds were intended for charitable use, not for Collins's personal indulgences or gratification. Wells also noted that Collins's attempt to reimburse a personal trip as a business expense was deceitful, as the hotel confirmed there was no conference. Collins argued that the high-pressure nature of his job entitled him to some relaxation at the trust's expense, likening it to investing. He also threatened legal action, stating that his contract would protect him from termination and that his attorney would sue for damages and restraining orders. Wells acknowledged that while Collins could pursue legal action, the community trust would ultimately prevail and pursue both civil and criminal charges. He offered a deal. If Collins admitted to misusing funds and agreed to restitution, he could resign quietly, avoiding charges. Wells presented Collins with a legal document, advising him to sign it as the best deal he could get. Collins, fuming, tucked the document into his coat jacket and said he would show it to his attorney, dismissing it with contempt. Wells, puzzled, noted that there seemed to be more to Collins's anger and speculated that it might involve Reverend Turner. Collins erupted with excitement, accusing Turner of breaking his priestly vows by revealing a confession. He claimed that Turner had betrayed him and that he intended to expose the priest and ruin his reputation. Wells, confused, asked for clarification. Collins revealed that he had confessed an affair to Turner, but hadn't named the other person. He insisted that Turner had broken his vow of secrecy once he realized the affair was with his own wife. Wells, in disbelief, defended Emily, asserting she would never cheat on Turner. Collins taunted Wells with explicit details about the affair, shocking him. Wells, now alarmed, urgently advised Collins to sign the document and leave town immediately, warning him that Turner's military background made him dangerous. Collins dismissed Wells's warnings about Reverend Turner's strength and dedication, insisting he was not afraid of either the priest or the board of trustees. He stormed out of Wells's office, slamming the door behind him. Wells, worried, tried calling Turner at Grace Church but could not reach him, repeatedly urging him not to do anything rash. Meanwhile, Emily was at her computer when Collins burst into her office, furious and shouting about Turner breaking the seal of confession and revealing Collins's secrets to Thomas Wells. Emily, trying to manage the situation amid the curious stares of her colleagues, asked Collins why he had confessed in the first place. Collins explained he wanted to undermine Turner's public image, boasting about how he had mocked the priest during the confession. Emily, horrified, demanded to know if Collins had revealed their affair. Outside, her co-workers reacted with shock, but Emily focused solely on Collins's response. Collins smirked as he revealed he had confessed to Turner about their affair and even taunted him by mentioning their beach trip. He gloated about making Turner a loser and planned to ruin him further. Emily, horrified, warned that Turner was a highly skilled sniper with a deadly record, not just a Marine Corps chaplain. She explained that Turner had brought his rifle down from the attic, a powerful tool capable of extreme damage. Desperate, Emily pleaded with Collins to leave town immediately, fearing for his safety. Collins, suspicious, questioned her motives, assuming her concern was insincere. With tears in her eyes, Emily admitted that despite her feelings for Collins, she was deeply concerned for Turner's well-being. She recounted how Turner had struggled profoundly after losing someone he loved and did not want to see him suffer again. Collins's uncertainty grew as he hesitated twice before finally dismissing Emily's warnings as nonsense. He was determined to expose Turner's flaws and stormed out of her office, heading for his car. As he drove back to the community trust, his thoughts were a mix of elation at having Turner's wife and anger at the priest for disclosing his confession. Though he was eager to let everyone know how he had humiliated Turner, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that the priest might be following him. Arriving at the community trust, Collins noticed groups of employees gathered outside and in the lobby, but he ignored them and rushed to his office. To his shock, he found the door wide open despite being sure he had closed it. Inside, his office was in disarray. Dust filled the air, papers were scattered, and his desk was splintered. His executive chair was overturned, with a large, ragged hole punched through the back. He then saw that the cinderblock wall behind his desk was shattered. As he stood there in stunned disbelief, the receptionist approached nervously and told him that Turner had left a package for him. The priest had asked her to make sure Collins received it immediately, saying it was urgent. Collins took the package from the receptionist and opened it cautiously. Inside, he found a large bullet, the biggest he had ever seen. Numbly, he hefted it, wondering if it was truly a rifle shell. He quickly returned it to the package and noticed a torn page from the Bible with the words, "An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth," highlighted. Recalling Emily's warning about Turner's skills, Collins's fear surged as he imagined the priest could be targeting him from nearby buildings. Panicked, he moved away from the window and noticed the hole in the wall. Trembling, he dropped to the floor, pulled out the document Wells had given him, signed it hastily, and left it on the dusty carpet. He dashed out of his office, shouting to the employees, "I signed it! Tell him not to shoot! I signed it!" He then sped to his car and drove away towards the interstate. After Collins left, Emily, still in shock, sat at her desk, drying her tears. Gathering herself, she grabbed her purse and told a co-worker she was leaving. When asked if she would return, she replied bleakly, "I doubt it." Emily drove quickly to Grace Church, desperate to find Turner. When she arrived, she rushed to his office, only to find it empty. Mrs. Baker, alarmed by Emily's distressed state, said she hadn't seen Turner since early that morning. Emily, frustrated and worried, asked Mrs. Baker to have Turner call her immediately and not to do anything rash. As she got into her car, Emily broke down in tears, overwhelmed by despair. She wished it was all a nightmare. Driving home, she hoped Turner would be there, but the driveway was empty. Feeling deeply depressed, she went inside and noticed her red, swollen eyes in the mirror in the bathroom. She tried to calm herself with cold water, only to discover with horror that the rifle bag she had seen earlier was now missing. Emily sank onto the bed, crying uncontrollably, tormented by guilt over possibly turning Turner back into a killer. She waited anxiously in the darkened bedroom until she heard a car in the driveway. When Turner walked in, the heavy tool slung over his shoulder, Emily fearfully asked, "Did you kill him?" "I intended to do more," he said, "but I ended up just scaring him half to death. It seems to have worked. Thomas called me not long ago from the community trust office. The staff told him that Collins left in a hurry like he was running from something. They found his resignation letter and confession in his office. I don't think we'll have to deal with Daniel Collins again. Emily gradually dropped to her knees, overwhelmed by a wave of relief. But then she looked up at Turner, her eyes now filled with new fear. "Are you going to kill me?" she asked. Quickly, he set his tool aside. "No, Emily," he said clearly, surprised. "Of course not. I could never hurt you, not even after what I did. Daniel told me he confessed everything to you." Turner shook his head firmly. "I can't reveal anything from a confession, but I figured out what you had done myself. Your behavior over the last few weeks made me suspicious. When I called Sarah after you left on Saturday, I learned you had lied to me about your plans. I took a chance and called the Royal Sands. They told me Mr. and Mrs. Collins had checked in. Later, Daniel's expense account showed he was there. And when I visited the house this morning, I found the hotel complimentary comb, proving you were there too." Emily then bowed her head in shame. "I'm so sorry, Turner. I regret it deeply. You don't even know the half of it. It's far worse than just cheating on you. I did terrible things with him, and he did even worse things to me. I'm so ashamed." Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at him. "I wish you would end me. I deserve to die." The anguish in his voice was evident. "Why, Emily, why did you do this? What did I do wrong?" She started to cry harder. "Oh, Turner, none of this is your fault. Somehow Daniel revealed a side of me I didn't know existed. He controlled me and used me, and I loved it. It was like an obsession. Once I tried it, I was obsessed." She gazed at him with desperate eyes. "I've seen many alcoholics and pill addicts in my work, and I was just like them. All I wanted was another fix, no matter who got hurt." He knelt beside her. "I understand temptation, Emily. I've faced it too, especially recently," he said quietly. She looked up at him. "Do you think you could ever love me again, even after everything?" He lifted her to her feet. "I will always love you, Emily." She hugged him tightly, her hope rekindled. "Can you forgive me? I know I've hurt you deeply, but I'll do everything to be the wife you deserve. Please forgive me." He met her gaze solemnly. "I do forgive you, Emily." She embraced him again, but he didn't respond. "What's wrong, Turner?" His eyes were filled with pain. "I'll always love you, but I can't stay married to you." "Why not?" she asked. "You said you forgave me." "I forgive you, but I can't forget what you've done. I've lost my faith in you." Her tears flowed harder. "Alex was different," he said. "I always trusted him. Even as he lay dying, he thought of me." He looked at her with despair. "You were my strength, Emily, but now I can't trust you. I have to learn to live without you." She collapsed on the floor, and this time, he left her there. When Thomas Wells entered the church office the next day, Turner was sorting through files. Thomas asked softly, "How did it go with Emily?" Turner looked up, troubled. "She's heading to her sister's today and plans to stay there until she finds a new place." "I'm really sorry, Turner," Thomas said. "I never expected things to turn out like this." Turner averted his gaze and continued working. "What are you doing?" Thomas asked. "I'm leaving Grace Church," Turner replied. "I'm quitting the priesthood." Thomas was shocked. "Turner, you can't do that. The people here need you." "They need someone better than me," Turner insisted. "I wasn't a good husband or priest. I failed to protect Emily from Daniel Collins and didn't act on the warning signs with the community trust." "You can't blame yourself," Thomas said. "Collins deceived us all, and everyone faces temptation. Emily isn't the first." Turner smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I still feel like I should have done more. I came close to hurting someone and damaged the office. What kind of priest is that?" Thomas smiled back. "Don't worry about the office. You got Collins's confession and resignation. The board might even give you a medal for handling him, not a bill for damages." Turner's expression grew serious. "No one could blame you for your anger at Collins," Thomas said. Turner replied bitterly, "That's the worst part, Thomas. I feel abandoned by God and lost my faith. I sought his help when I discovered Emily's betrayal, but felt nothing. Where was he when I needed him? He showed Thomas his sermon notes. Here's my sermon on Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember how God sent an angel to rescue Lot? Where was my angel? In a hushed tone, Turner admitted, I almost killed that man. If Linda Cooper hadn't brought those expense accounts to me, I would have shot him. Thomas looked puzzled. What did you say, Reverend Turner? Turner, realizing his words, paused in surprise. I said I would have killed Collins if Linda hadn't shown up, he said thoughtfully. After a moment, Turner began organizing his desk. Maybe this is where I belong, after all, he said quietly.